This video is sponsored by Refantasia, Charm and Conquer. This chapter starts off with us seeing Garo surveying the battlefield, and he's like, all the S-class heroes that have been scattered on the ground. Even in this situation, they're not showing their faces. I guess that means they're all staying down. And he's only seeing a portion, of course, along with Saitama, Flashy Flash, and Monako, but what he's not taking into account are the heroes that we saw come back in the previous chapter. My Mask, Pig God, Fubuki, and Tank Top Master. Now, I don't know if they're necessarily going to come back and fight Garo, especially considering what we see happen later on in this chapter, but I do assume that they're going to come back into the fray at some point. Now, he also says, I will become absolute evil without fail. My fist is perfected as well. So this is in reference to his battle against Sage Centipede, where in that fight he had perfected his fist, which essentially means that like his proprietary martial arts style, along with his fighting prowess and power level, has peaked. And he feels that he's in a position to become the absolute evil. And that little moniker is in reference to chapter 136, when Garo's machinations finally came to the surface. Because after he neutered Darkshine and the rubble fell on him after Tazumaki pulled the Monster Association out of the ground, he came to like this point of struggle and also enlightenment, where he revealed that he wanted to become the very despair that will forever knock humanity down into the depths of terror. And we see like this fantasy sequence of Garo becoming like this kaiju that eats other kaiju, and we see all of these people like running in fear from him, and this is essentially what he wants. And while he's not killing them, he wants them all to be united under equal terror, and with that they'll just be grateful for being alive. Evil will fade away in a world where existence isn't taken for granted. So will bullying, discrimination, and even war. What the world needs is not biased justice, but absolute unbiased evil. And then after this grand monologue, we see him further struggling, where he remembers Terrio. When he was originally saving Terrio from the Monster Association, Terrio asked him, Uncle, how do you know about this place? You know, the Monster Association. And he says, because I'm a monster. And then him remembering him just saying that further triggered his transformation and sent him deeper on God's path of monsterization. And then we see him go into that full-blown like monster transformation that we currently still see him in, although at that point he kind of went to a feral state. And that brings us full circle here, because yes, despite how Garo has been acting in these last couple chapters, he still does in fact want to become this ultimate evil, although it's kind of a misnomer, and it's just like an edgy way that Garo wants to label his ultimate goal here, where he essentially wants to become like this ruthlessly pragmatic, benevolent figure that forces peace, but without being labeled that. But first, let's talk about the sponsor of this video, Refantasia, Charm and Conquer. So Refantasia, Charm and Conquer is a medieval isekai where you can assemble a team to help manage operations on the home front in a world ruled by superstition and fear. But there's also romantic encounters, of course. Elves, bestians, fairies, demons, and even goddesses. Create your own love stories with different consorts and discover the joy of parenthood surrounded by your offspring. You can also build an alliance with like-minded travelers and fight against your common enemy. But might isn't always right. Win the heart and loyalty of your followers with your charisma and intellect. You can level up your heroes and train your troops automatically so that they may overcome all opposition. So I've been playing this game for like the last hour, and I gotta say, it's pretty fun. There's like so much stuff to do, and the dialogue is so interesting, and it goes places you wouldn't think. So guys, if you want to play Refantasia, Charm and Conquer, check out the link in my description, and make sure you also use this bonus code. That way you're gonna get 2 glass brushes, 2 clovers, and 100 crystals. Thanks guys. But then Garo remembered that, oh wait, Evil Natural Ocean was out there. What happened to him? And then it brings us to the end of the previous chapter, where Saitama drops in and comes face to face with Garo. Saitama, of course, was the one who took out Evil Natural Ocean a couple chapters back with a freaking serious punch. Although it was implied that he wasn't exactly killed, because we saw that the eyeballs had survived. So he might come back, especially since he's being brought up again here. But anyway, like I said, we're coming back to the end of the previous chapter, where Saitama asked Garo, like, what are you supposed to be? Garo thinks to himself, oh, Saitama must be some chump hero sent out for rescue operations. And then he hears Bang in his head saying, follow the voice of your heart, which of course is reference to when Bang and Garo fought a couple chapters back. Garo's still in his monster-fied feral state, Bang trying to pull him away from God's influence and bring him back to the sun. But as Garo has established, he needs to throw away everything in order to achieve his ultimate goal here, where he's saying, sorry old man, I'm gonna have to do something only I can do. Because at this point, as we've established, Garo feels that he is the only one strong enough to bring this world forcefully to peace. And he elaborates this to Saitama by saying, I am the one who will strike down all of mankind equally. into the depths of despair, I am the one who will become absolute evil. Going further, he says, and make this world where everybody will know the pain that these darn heroes turned a blind eye to. So the pain, of course, is just bullying, because we know in Garo's backstory he was bullied by some shadow people because he didn't want to conform to their hero worship. He was more a fan of like the villains, and not even necessarily because they were evil, but because he saw the heroes as being bullies and overpowered because of the plot, essentially. But we also see Terrio in this panel as well, and that's of course the reason why Garo cares for Terrio the way that he does. When he first met Terrio, he was being bullied the way that Garo was as a child, so naturally he relates to that, as well as it being his ultimate motive for becoming the absolute evil. And that's exactly what Saitama says in response to this. He's like, you're evil? Didn't you just save that helicopter being chased down by the centipede? You cut it in half with a karate chop. And then Garo goes into his classic deflecting and being delusional about what his actual objective goal is by saying like, first I need witnesses to spread my influence. I wanted to show the passengers that I'm stronger than any hero or monster. If you understand that, then get out of here and think about a career change. I'm not stopping with the Monster Association. The Hero Association gets annihilated tonight too. And then we see this awesome panel of the Hero Association itself being split just like Stage Centipede. And I don't want to go too deep into this, but this could also be foreshadowing for what is to come with the Hero Association, not literally but figuratively. And then Saitama's just like, all right, well, if you're not a monster, then I'm out. I mean, you don't even look like a monster. So I guess I'm not needed here. Then out of nowhere, Saitama shows a little glimpse of his true self. And we're reminded of Saitama's inherent motivations for even coming into this arc in the first place. Because he says, I go to complain about the noise and somehow my house gets blown up. So now I'm stuck trying to find my stuff by fishing around at a tide pool. And this is coming full circle as well, just like with Garo. Because Garo was kind of the cause of the noise. Because when he went to go save Terrio, he eventually ran into Overgrown Rover, and he started firing off those huge fire blasts underground, and it started causing like tremors and earthquakes in Z City. And Saitama was just like, all right, I've had enough of this, I'm going down. And then it got to the point of where like Tatsumaki and Psychos destroyed all of Z City, and Saitama just had enough of it. And he actually says, I kind of feel like I'd rather just obliterate the whole planet. And this dialogue is presented the same way that like God's dialogue is. So another interesting thing about this is that it's a callback to chapter 59 from the webcomic, because in that continuity, as Saitama was going to go down into the Monster Association after the Garo and Rover fight was causing noise, he said, first I lose my dinner, on top of that something interrupts my sleep. If this day gets any crappier, I'll end up destroying the earth. And since he obviously didn't say this when he originally went down there, I thought maybe one of Murata just wanted to remove this to make Saitama more palatable to the casual, you know, but no, the true Saitama is back again in the manga. And I really like that Garo can like feel the seriousness of that statement, because after this he's like, what was that pressure? Who is this guy? But Saitama essentially says that, you know, he was just looking to blow off some steam by taking out Evil Natural Ocean, and that he was hoping that Garo was going to be like the Monster King, and that he actually thought he looked pretty cool, but then he realized that it's not him. And Saitama's just about to peace out, but Garo comes up on him just like he has before. But of course, Saitama just effortlessly backhands him. And then Garo finally comes to the realization that, oh, this has happened to me 3 times already. And then we see the flashbacks of Saitama backhanding Garo after the Dine and Dash, after he foolishly attacked King, and when they originally first met. And he's like, I remember now, that mysterious overpowered bald guy I kept running into over and over again. And then in the final panel, we see the helicopter with the support team coming out. Now this is pretty interesting because remember, Terrio was on board this helicopter. And a couple weeks back, we talked about Terrio possibly being the catalyst that causes Garo to go like full-blown monster, and maybe that comes back now. But either way, I'm assuming in the next chapter Garo might have like another transformation or something, or just the backhand that Saitama gave him makes him evolve yet again, because that also takes us back to chapter 136 when Garo was talking to himself before the whole absolute evil monologue. He said, what's happening? The more I get overwhelmed, the more I increase in power. Like this, I can climb up and reach the realm of disaster level God. So this is obviously the most most overwhelmed he'll ever be. So it's possible that this might cause him to reach the realm of disaster level god. I can't ever truly admit that someone is disaster level god unless the narration box explicitly says it, but I'm pretty sure if he does transform at this point, he's gonna get the closest that anyone has besides Saitama and God. Maybe even more so than Blast. But yeah, that's the end of the chapter, and just to finish this video off, I want to bring up a little note from Vibhav. On the raw cover page, he pointed out that the wording here means planet and not star, referencing back to the post that he made that we talked about in my Above Dragon Dead / Ryuijo video, which goes back to the age-old question of the collapsing star roaring cannon being able to destroy a planet or a star. So hopefully that clears it up, but if not, then I guess keep arguing about it. So the chapter opens up with us seeing Sekigahara talking to the support team and Moomin Rider, and he's pretty much saying that they need to get out of there by boat, and that things may have calmed down for now, but for all we know, monsters could pop out again at any moment. And I'm pretty sure this is being stated for a reason, because it's very likely that that's going to happen. I talked about this in the previous review, but it seems like evil natural water is still going to be a thing, so he's probably going to come back. And, you know, Psychos is still out there, and she kind of needs to come back into the picture. So we've got those two lingering variables at least. Then Lightning Max questions like who took out those two huge creatures previously. Sage Centipede and Evil Natural Ocean. And Terrio, who is also there, says it's gotta be Uncle. Uncle is what he refers to as Garo. I think it's like a Japanese thing maybe. But Terrio further pushing the agenda that Garo is a hero who protected him on multiple occasions. Then suddenly the sky starts sparking and the ground starts rumbling, and it appears that there's some kind of Dragon Ball Z-esque fight going on. And it turns out it is, because Garo is finally fighting Saitama, and it's pretty satisfying to finally see this. Maybe some of you aren't aware, but this fight has already transpired in the original continuity of the webcomic for many years now. I think for like over 6 years. So that's why you'll probably see a lot of people already talking about this, or you'll see a whole bunch of videos on YouTube talking about the result of this. But I can assure you that it is not playing out the same way that it did in the webcomic. But there's a missing element of this fight, because in the previous chapter we saw Saitama like backhand Garo into the sky, and I guess he chased Garo up there, or Garo somehow pulled him into the sky, because they're like having a sky fight. And Garo is showing here that he is ridiculously powerful, because he's evading a strike from Saitama and countering him with like an axe kick, sending him into the ground. Clearly this is a huge feat, since not anyone can just avoid a strike from Saitama. Then Garo comes down on him with like a chop to the head, and this is so powerful that it like breaks the ground and there's like lightning everywhere. But as we know, this is not really going to do anything, because it's Saitama. And his counter to this is just simply springing upwards, and he literally breaks Garo's hand. It like shatters like it's glass or something. But then surprisingly, it instantly comes back together. And it seems like a mixture of traditional monster regeneration, but also like the whirlwind iron cutting fists at the same time. This could also be us finally seeing what Murata was talking about 4 years ago on his stream, when he was talking about the hole that Orochi made in Garo's stomach, saying that the puncture wound will absorb black matter from air, spiral inward, and close itself. Then Saitama says, what's with you picking a fight out of nowhere? Oh well, I still had something to say to you, so no big deal. Then he just clocks Garo, and he sends him all the way to where the support team is, creating like this huge crater in the process. This is also a callback to the original continuity of the webcomic. This was like the end result of his initial strike on Garo at that time. And then Garo gets up, and Terrio's like, Uncle, letting everyone else know that, hey, this is the guy that I was talking about, by the way. And Sekigahara's like, I don't know anything about him, but he did help us fight that monster centipede earlier. Then we go into Garo's inner monologue, and he's like, I was right there, just when I was about to reach my ultimate goal. The biggest hurdle of them all had to get in my way. I've got to take him out. Then Garo transforms. and he becomes the most monster that he's ever been so far. And he says, "What's this? In response to my rage, my body is mutating?" And this, of course, goes back to the age-old crucial exposition that we got from Dr. Genius in chapter 86 regarding monsterification. Because as he said, when humans become monsters, there is an explosion of frustration resulting from unsatisfied desires and the urge to transform. Driven by destructive behaviors and psychological complexes, the individual's past circumstances and other factors may give rise to cellular abnormalities and spontaneous mutation. And Garo, of course, has been slowly undergoing this process for quite a while now. But this is the most critical his situation has ever been, so he is reaching the apex of his monsterization. Although he's not 100% there yet, but he's like, I don't know, 99% maybe. So after seeing this, Sekengar and the support team are like, all right, we got to get out of here. And they start putting everybody on the boats, but Tario gets off and goes back to Garo. Garo sees Tario and he's like, hey, you're alive. Because, you know, Tario has been a large part of Garo's character arc here. It's the whole reason why he came to the Monster Association in the first place, to save him. But this moment reminds Tario of one of the other moments that Garo had saved him back in season 2 when Death Gatling was like firing off on Garo, but there was also that shed behind him with Tario inside of it. Garo like barehanded stopped all the bullets and then, you know, took out Death Gatling, and then when Tario came out, he was like, oh, you're alive. But this time is a little different because Tario's like, this time I won't run away. You were a hero all along, weren't you? And Garo's like, how many times do I have to tell you? Just what part of me is a hero? Take a good look. Finally managed to change into a monster. And he's like, no, you're a hero. I know it for a fact. Whenever I'm in trouble, you always come running to save me. To me, you're the coolest and greatest hero of them all. You'll make everyone misunderstand you and hate you. I don't want that. And then Tario begins to cry and Garo's like, don't make that face. Not when I finally can show you the moment where the monster wins. This is also a callback to that previous moment when Garo had saved Tario from Death Gatling, because that's what he says before he barehanded blocks those shots. Then Saitama starts walking up and he's like, you're Garo, right? Man, you're gonna make the old man cry, referring to his master Silverfang, who Saitama is very close with and got information about Garo from him. And then going further, he says, you hunt down heroes, wreck a bunch of dojos, and now you're pretending to be a monster and making kids cry? Act like a grown-up, for crying out loud. No need for sudden hissy fits. Then Garo says, watch closely. I'm about to destroy your outlook on life. I'll show you just how powerless heroes are. There won't be anyone left alive to kill you or save you. So that's an interesting little line there, right? There will be no one left alive to kill you or save you. Because going further, he says, and put a permanent end to the unreasonable world that made both of us cry. This also goes back to Garo's inherent and flawed motivation, trying to rid the world of bullying. Because as I talked about in my previous chapter, because he met Tario when he was being bullied by other kids, the same way that Garo was bullied in his youth. And then Saitama gets in Garo's face and he's like, you want to hit me? Go ahead, you chicken. And this is also a callback to the original continuity of the webcomic. And Garo lets it rip on Saitama's face, but, you know, of course, this has no effect on him. And then he just smacks Garo away. And he says, let's take this over there. And then Saitama says to Tario, you want me to stop him, right? But not kill him? Tario like nods like, yeah. So then Saitama's like, gotcha, leave it to me. And that's where the chapter ends. So I'm assuming at this point we'll get the big extended fight that we've been waiting for, I guess. I don't think it's just going to end anticlimactically, because they need to have some kind of big moment for the season of the anime whenever this eventually gets adapted in 10 years to end off on. So we need to have some kind of like Boros versus Saitama second coming, you know, and I really do expect them to give that to us. Also, I'm pretty sure there's still one massive serious feat that Saitama has to pull off before this fight or just arc is over in general. Although it may be a little problematic for how it works within their world, but I guess that never really mattered anyway. So don't lose hope yet. Pretty sure it is still coming. All right, so we've got a strong chapter this week, and Garo has evolved yet again, and he seems to be pushing Saitama just a little more than he has before, and I think this is going to be a recurring theme going forward into this fight for sure. And that's where we come to Saitama asking Garo, like, what exactly are you trying to accomplish? I figured that you'd have like a grudge against heroes or something, but I saw you working together with them to take down that huge centipede monster, Sage Centipede, who he worked with Metal Bat a couple chapters back to take down. And Saitama's like, if you want to do that, that kind of stuff, you can just be a hero. Like, you don't have to pretend to be a monster, bro. And Garo, of course, further deflecting from this, going deeper into his delusion, saying that he was just using him and that he wasn't actually working with him, and it's all just a means to an end for his goal. Saitama's like, oh, your goal, the absolute evil thing, right? And world peace or something? And Garo didn't exactly say to Saitama that that was his goal, but Saitama is kind of like putting two and two together here and realizing that this whole absolute evil thing is Garo essentially trying to save the world via forced peace, for all of them to unite in the fear under him. This is Garo essentially pulling off his own Ozymandias gambit. Hey, also guys, real quick, a lot of you consistently watch my One Punch Man chapter reviews or just One Punch Man content in general, but you don't subscribe. And if it's because you don't like me or whatever, that's fine, I get it. But if you just never thought about subscribing and you needed to be reminded, well, here you go. Please subscribe. Thank you. So then Garo goes after Saitama again, and we're further seeing Garo's like insane martial arts skills at this point. He said a couple chapters back that he had perfected his fist and style. He now has the God Slayer fist style, which is a collection of all of the experiences and martial art techniques that he's combined into one perfect style. And he's so powerful and effective here that he's like actually overcoming Saitama and countering him. Granted, Saitama isn't really trying here. And I know that we're all aware of this, but some people are like kind of psychotic about this stuff, so I have to like say it, because if I don't, then, you know, they get all crazy. But it is showing how incredibly powerful Garo is right now. Like, imagine if this was anyone else besides Saitama, and I mean like anyone else. I'd really like to see how he would do against Blast at this point. Not saying he would win, I would just like to see it. But then Garo goes into his God Slayer instant attack, and I guess beforehand in the webcomics continuity, this maybe was the apex of Awakened Garo's power or his technique. While this is happening, Saitama like tunnels underground and winds up on the side of Garo. And Saitama says, that weird way you're moving and making my punches miss, is that martial arts or something? Garo says it's the ultimate martial arts technique, and he continues to flurry Saitama, but we see Saitama like avoiding it all nonchalantly and kind of goofily. And Garo says he's outpacing my combo attacks with just miraculous reflexes and reaction speed, but his technique is still that of a complete amateur. He's got plenty of openings to take advantage of. Part of me thinks that this dialogue isn't kind of just exposition for the moment. I do think this is probably going to come back later. Like I said in the beginning, I think this is going to be a theme going forward into this fight, as where Garo is, I guess at some point, going to push Saitama or challenge him more so than anybody else has, even Boros. And I know ostensibly it doesn't seem that Garo has reached that peak Boros level yet, but I'm assuming that he will before this is over. And this could be hinting at that. Because remember, while Boros was an insane savage berserker powerhouse, he did not have the martial arts that Garo has. I mean, go back and reread or watch the fight between Boros and Saitama. Boros never blocks or evades or anything like that. Then Garo hits Saitama with the God Slayer ascending attack and like launches him into a building, and then that building kind of turns other buildings into like a layer cake of destruction. And then he immediately follows up on Saitama and hits him with the great power attack and just completely destroys all of these buildings. This is one of the greatest feats in the series, easily. And Garo thinks that this big savage attack was able to take care of Saitama, but of course, like, it does nothing. There's not even like a scratch on him. Then we see that Garo blowing these buildings away was saving these staff members that were like trapped in the underground shelter. And they realize that Saitama's a hero and they start thanking him, and Saitama's like, no, don't thank me, thank this guy, he's the one who did it. And Saitama says, man, absolute evil sure is good at saving people. You've got this down to a D. And this is going to be like a recurring theme in this chapter, and this feels more like classic One writing, and I'm really just enjoying this adaptation of the original story. I personally like the more poppy aspects that One tends to adapt as he goes further, but that's just me. Maybe you feel differently, and that's fine, but I know a majority of you are none the wiser of what the original story was anyway, so it doesn't even matter. But then we cut away from their fight for a little bit, and we see like this volcano erupting, and the lava's like spilling down, and it's about to like reach this portion of the city, and they're trying to like evacuate the area and everything. And then suddenly Garo and Saitama's fight switches to where the volcano is, and we see Garo further evolve yet again, and he becomes like this bat demon devil monster thing. And I think this might be a callback to chapter 48. Yes, many years ago. When Saitama is talking to Tank Top Master in the hospital after he was defeated by Garo, Tank Top Master explains to him like how Garo is different from the other monsters that he's faced, as to where he uses martial arts and technique to defeat his opponents. And when he's describing this to Saitama, the audience sees this monster and it looks like Garo does right now. There's actually even one hand that has like the index and middle finger kind of poking thing going on. And Tank Top Master describing this to Saitama intrigues him. And he's like, it won't be long before it comes for me. So is this all kind of coming full circle right here? I can't say for sure, but I have faith that One and Murata are probably doing it purposely. But Garo winds up knocking Saitama into the side of the volcano, and it blows off like a portion of it, and it causes the lava to start flowing down to the other side of the mountain, away from the city and the people. And they're all like cheering and everything. So yet again, Garo has inadvertently saved tons of people in his fight with Saitama. Then after getting knocked into the mountain, Saitama punches Garo right in the face, but this doesn't really seem to affect him as much as the other punches have, and this is just further showing that he's come so far. And then Saitama says this whole shtick where you're not even trying and things turn out perfect, you kind of remind me of King in a way. You have great hero instincts, don't you? And that's perfect because it is like King, which goes back to this feeling more like classic One writing, and I'm just really a big fan of this. But that's where the chapter ends, and like I said, I don't think this is how this fight's going to end. Like, I don't think even this form that we see of Garo is his last form. I think that something is going to happen, and this whole big exterior is eventually going to break off of him, and I think we will see what the true awakened Garo is, like this slick, streamlined, more form-fitting transformation. Then we might see like a meteoric burst Boros-esque performance from Garo against Saitama, where Saitama might get like a rush from how powerful Garo is and how much he's able to push Saitama. And then we might see like the big grand fight that we've been waiting for, more so than kind of just this pseudo squash match that we're getting here. I have faith that One is really going to make this a satisfying ending to this arc, and the next couple chapters are probably going to be incredible. Okay, so I know most of you are super hyped about this chapter because it's amazing. There is so much to talk about with this one, so let's just get right into it. So in the beginning here, we're seeing that Pig God has survived. That's great. We kind of knew that was the case, but we're continuing the Saitama and Garo fight here, coming off of the previous chapter where he had transformed into like his big gargoyle demonic form. The closest he's been to a monster so far, maybe 99.9% there at this point, who really knows. But he's like lighting Saitama up with a barrage of fists, and he's thinking like, okay, technique, speed, power, that's not working, so I guess attacks. It's like, how do I take this guy down? And Saitama, of course, is like evading all of these strikes, and he's like, how many hands do you got? Then Garo evolves yet again and like produces 2 more arms, so now he has like 4 arms. And then he thinks, okay, let me get creative against Saitama, and he puts 2 hands on his chest, and then his other hands like spread out and start charging energy, and then like some kind of jet or something, he shoots like beams out of his hands and sends Saitama directly down into like this mountain. Pretty sure this is like the first time we're seeing energy projection from Garo, so he's like really at the top of like the monster scale at this point, despite not 100% being a monster. Also guys, if you like my One Punch Man reviews, please subscribe if you haven't already. So many of you consistently watch these videos, but you don't subscribe. So if you just needed to be reminded to do that, here you go. Thank you. And when I say that he's not like a complete monster yet, it's because I'm pretty sure he's eventually going to revert back to being a human again. It was teased back when we saw Bang and Bomb interacting with Super S's love slaves. They weren't like completely monsterfied yet, and through the power of their hearts, they were able to revert back to humans. And apparently that's like the thing there. Like if you're not completely a monster yet, you can still come back to a human. And Bang even himself was like thinking of Garo in that instance. So for sure likely means Garo is going to revert back to a human after this is all over. But anyway, despite that, he's still at the highest level of monsterness that we've seen outside of like Orochi and Platinum S probably. His extreme power attack sends Saitama through an entire mountain. And then we see this incredible sequence of the earth like reverberating inside from this impact to where it goes all the way to the other side of the earth. And there we see this plane that had to like make an emergency landing in the ocean. And there's all these people that are trapped on it and whatnot, and they're like about to die because it's sinking. But because this massive attack that Garo did to Saitama is subducting the earth's crust, we see a portion of it rise up and save these people from drowning. Going back to what we saw in the previous chapter where Garo was like inadvertently saving these civilians with his attacks against Saitama, this is like the grandest feat of it yet. But something else incredible is happening in this sequence, because as this piece of crust starts to emerge from the water, we see like this ancient temple come out of it as well, where like the people are falling on. And this temple is the same temple from chapter 119 of the webcomic, because this is literally the cruel dragon. And I have been talking about this sequence for like the last couple weeks now. I've made like 2 or 3 videos on it. I think I even talked about it on Anime Balls Deep channel, how the cold open sequence from chapter 119 of the webcomic is basically telling us the truth about God's story along with like what Blast is doing. And considering that we literally see Blast and his boys in the next sequence, I don't think it's a coincidence. And it turns out that yes, that is pretty much the case of what's going on here. So let me just give you a quick rundown, and since it's coming from the webcomic in the future of the story, it's technically spoilery, but it's not ruining anything. But anyway, Saitama runs into like these knight looking guys. They start telling Saitama that according to legend, a colossal dragon descended upon Earth and became the embodiment of destruction. In just a few days, it took countless lives and scorched large swaths of land. As a result of its overwhelming cruelty, it became known as the Cruel Dragon. And like I said, right here, we see the Cruel Dragon. And in my opinion, this Cruel Dragon represents God. But now I'm thinking that maybe the Cruel Dragon was a form that God chose at one point, or maybe the Cruel Dragon was like one of God's prime disciples, like one of his strongest monsters. Really up in the air at this point, but going forward, he says ancient soldiers gathered together and with a great many sacrifices managed to weaken the Cruel Dragon. Seal masters separated the essence of the dragon using 9 seal stones and sealed them in 9 temples scattered across the land. So these seal stones, in my opinion, are pretty much the cubes that we see like Blast going after, the same cubes that Saitama, Flash, and Monako came across, and when they touched them, they were able to communicate with God. This is pretty much what happened to God. Back in the day, there were like these seal masters, and they sealed God somehow. That's why we see him in like that fetal position, because he's sealed in like some kind of hypercube or something. And as I've also been talking about in my Truth About One Punch Man videos, please check out the playlist if you haven't already. This entire story is based off of the Osiris myth, because God himself is based off of the Egyptian god of the moon, Osiris. And in that story, Osiris was tricked to get into a box, and that box was cut into pieces and thrown into the Nile. And I'm pretty sure the same exact thing is going on here. Whatever seal that God was put into was split into those cubes, and that's why they were scattered all around and whatnot. But going further, he says the duty of watching over the Cruel Dragon seals was passed down to our branch known as the Saints. And I'm pretty sure the Saints are Blast and his boys here. It's their duty to watch over the cubes. That's why he's always going after them, and that's why he's currently doing what he's doing. And then on the other side of the coin, it says those who believe themselves to be Dragonborn are plotting to resurrect the Cruel Dragon and belong to an organization known as Deathbone. So the others are obviously like the monsters in general, but also like Psychos, Orochi, the Monster Association, and this is probably going to upset you, but also Drive Knight. Now, as we saw, Psychos isn't exactly fully aware that she is serving God yet, and I'm pretty sure the same thing is going on with Drive Knight, but eventually they will come to know the truth when he eventually is resurrected, which I'm pretty sure he will be. But anyway, let's go into the Blast portion of this chapter. So we see Blast, and it finally tells us where he is, which is straight up confirming another dimension. And he says the space around Earth is starting to distort. Magnetic and gravitational fields are going crazy. And then we see one of his Saints members here explaining what's going on when she says it looks like some of the oceanic plates that have subducted into the Earth via crustal movement were pushed back out by some powerful force. And then we see Boros, and he's like, Ooh, who could have done that? This is incredible. And I'm beyond hyped about this, and I'm sure so many of you are. But the real question here is like, is this Boros himself? And to be honest, I don't think it is. Now, don't get me wrong, it could be, and that would also be incredible if, I don't know, he somehow came back or Blast found him at the last second and resurrected him. I mean, if anybody could, it was Blast. I mean, he could just show up with a portal and then take him and then, I don't know, do some Blast magic to him and bring him back. But I don't think that's the case, because his hair looks different and the markings on his face are different from Boros as well. But what I'm thinking is more likely here is that this guy is one of Boros's race. And I think that's more likely because this also lines up with one of the theories I've had for years now, and that Boros is connected to God. Or should I say that Boros's planet was one of the planets that God was interested in? Because these seal masters that came together, I'm thinking weren't just domestic on Earth. I'm thinking that story more so represented like a universal type of thing. Like all of these individuals that we see with Blast are coming from different planets. I don't think they're coming from different dimensions, although they are literally in a different dimension right now. I think this different dimension is like where God is being sealed. So I don't think this is like a multiverse type of thing and this is like a different universe as Boros. I mean, it could be, but I just think it's more so just one universe type of thing going on here. And this guy is coming from Boros's planet, meaning that Boros was kind of a disciple of God, although I'm pretty sure he wasn't aware of it, just like how Psychos and Drive Knight aren't aware of it. And that's why in chapter 86, when Dr. Gina says the aliens who attacked a city were also monsters, I think that's specifically put there because monsters mean product of God. And that's also why Boros is able to transform. Now, I'm not saying that this guy can transform, but it's possible that when we saw Boros go into his released form and meteoric burst, that's like their equivalent of transforming into a monster. And it's also the reason why Boros went to Earth in the first place, because the alien seer, who I'm pretty sure may have straight up been God or like another disciple of his, purposely told Boros to go to Earth because that's where the altar is that resurrects him. It's possible that he wanted him to go there to interact with Orochi or straight up be the worthy sacrifice that was placed on the altar if Orochi didn't straight up like absorb him or use him or whatever his plans were. So the fact that we're seeing another Boros race member here, I don't think is a coincidence. And it's all tying together. Also, we're seeing like a lion type being here, which I'm sure it reminds a lot of people of Battle Beast from Invincible, but also the Beast King from earlier on in the series. I don't think this is him because he would know that, you know, Saitama is probably capable of doing this, but he seems oblivious to it since he's like, I can't imagine that any Earthlings could have managed such a thing. So I'm thinking this is just like another alien race like the others that we see. And his planet, of course, was targeted by God, and he comes from, you know, one of the original Seal Masters with the Saints here. But coming to the end of the sequence, Blast is like, he's going to break through the dimensional seal. We've got to hurry up and repair it. Goes back to what I was talking about with the exposition from webcomic chapter 119. Seal Master separated the essence of the dragon using 9 seal stones and sealed them in temples scattered across the land. But anyway, back to Garo versus Saitama. So as Garo is like plunging Saitama into the earth, Saitama's just like, okay, dude, you had enough fun. And then he hits him with consecutive normal punches. And then they wind up spiraling out of the hole. And I'm sure a lot of you are thinking like, oh wow, he's taking consecutive normal punches better than Boros did. That is true, but also this takes us back to the original argument that we always had for Boros versus Garo, and that's Saitama is holding back against Garo as to where he wasn't really holding back against Boros. Clearly, Saitama doesn't want to kill Garo here, and with Boros, I'm pretty sure he wasn't too concerned about that. I'm not saying one is definitively stronger than the other because that incredible feat with the whole mountain and the earth stuff is certainly on par with what Meteoric Burst Boros could do. So it's possible they're like around the same level right now, or straight up on the same level, or maybe Garo's stronger. Who knows? But as Garo's getting hammered by these, he's thinking back to Sage Centipede saying to destroy the abominable fist that turned against God, and he says, I thought he was talking about me. And to be honest, I thought he was talking about Garo too, because God, along with most characters, seems to be oblivious of Saitama. And then Garo says, but it must have been about this guy. And to be honest, I'm not really sure, and I think one is purposely trying to confuse us with this. Now, I'm sure some of you are like, well, I know what's going on here, and hey, if you do, more power to you, but I think this is left up for interpretation. It could be either or, but man, that would be pretty interesting if God is certainly aware of Saitama, because if he was, he would have acted differently up until this point, right? But anyway, Saitama winds up knocking Garo like miles away, and he pulls up in front of him and he's like, "Are you satisfied yet?" And Garo gets up and he's like, "This is it. If my dreams of absolute evil have fallen apart completely, then let it happen by this man's fist." I had a feeling somewhere deep inside that this wouldn't work out. And then we see him launch at Saitama in a similar fashion that Meteor Burst Boros did, and Garo starts questioning like, "Is this how I wanted to die all along?" And then Saitama catches his fist and he's like, "There's no point in keeping this up. You already know that, don't you?" Then Garo straight up asks Saitama to like kill him. He's like, "You're a hero, aren't you? Then kill me." And then Saitama says, "Sounds like you have some hero issues after all. If there's something you want to talk about, I'm all ears. No need to stand here while we chat." And then they go over to like this wrecked building, and then we get this interesting ending where Saitama is sitting down with Garo in this room and they're about to talk, while God, representative of the moon, is in the background watching. So this ending is going to upset some people, of course, but you know, there's probably way more people that are intrigued by it, which I'm one of them. I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes. It's possible that the next chapter might be like full-blown talk no jutsu, and the conclusion of this fight isn't like a big crazy battle. It's just a conversation, and that's how Garo is ultimately defeated and maybe reverts back to being a human. And honestly, if it plays out right, which I think that it will, I would totally be on board with how this ultimately wraps up. I think that would be pretty interesting. And yeah, it's gonna anger some people because we're not getting a big Dragon Ball Z ultimate final fight, and yeah, cool feats of power and that. But you know, it doesn't always have to be that way. I mean, clearly we got some awesome moments already, but I'm welcomed to something different like this. And I talked a little bit about this on Twitter, which saw everybody disagreeing with me, which is fine, nothing new. But I said that I'm pretty sure that Garo is going to accept God's influence, and that led to everybody be like, "No, you're wrong. You don't understand the character like we do." Not saying that he's going to be like, "Yes, God, please give me the evil power. I accept you and I want to be your underling." No, it's obviously not going to happen that way. We saw that God is very deceptive. Garo could be tricked into receiving God's influence. And while it may not literally be like God, like impersonating Bang or whoever, or maybe even Tario, and convincing Garo to accept his influence that way, but I assure you that there is going to be a paradigm shift with Garo where he finally gives over to the monster side and his shell breaks and we see like this super aesthetic, awesome, perfect monster form. It's coming. LOL bearded worker in the comments, boys. But holy crap, what an unexpected twist. So yeah, this is chapter 164, but about 3/5 of it has been redrawn, and in a way that completely changes everything that we were just coming off of with all of that Boros stuff, which we'll get into, but it also changes so much more, and in such a better and more significant way. So at the end of the previous chapter, we saw that Garo had essentially accepted that he just couldn't defeat Saitama, and it eventually led them to going to this random house where they sat down and were gonna have like a little talk no jutsu session. And like I said in my previous review, I was totally on board with that. I thought it was interesting and it was very different if it was ultimately gonna go in that direction. It's possible that maybe this is what one always wanted, and that conversation was going to lead to all of the craziness that was going to happen in this chapter. Obviously, I don't know. One never returns my texts, so I don't know what caused this big 180 in the narrative here. It's hard to believe that he kind of just sprung this on the fly. So either he always intended for this to happen, but he kind of just wanted to remove the connective tissue that was happening in the previous iteration and just decided it was better to get to this point now, or he had two paths that he wanted to take, and maybe he decided that the original one that he decided to go with wasn't necessarily the right one. Anyway, this chapter starts off pretty much the same way that the original one did, and Garo springs another set of arms, but it actually happens earlier in this chapter. He starts rapid firing at Saitama, who evades it, of course, but in this iteration, Saitama is also blocking them with one arm. But this leads to Garo becoming more angry than he was originally, because this time around he remembers those office workers in the previous chapter like bowing to him, thanking him for inadvertently saving killing them. And he says it was that simple to make all my preparation and resolve waver. That's how pathetic I was. And then talking about Saitama, he says he mocks me for it. And this leads him to plunging Saitama into that mountain. And this sequence pretty much plays out the same way, sending a shockwave through Earth that reverberates to the other side. And he still winds up inadvertently saving these people who were stranded in this plane in the ocean on the other side of the world, which also causes the oceanic plates to subduct into the Earth via crustal movement. Also guys, if you like my One Punch Man content, please subscribe to this channel. A lot of you consistently watch it, but you don't subscribe. So if you just needed a reminder, here you go. And it still unearths that dragon temple place that we saw. And it makes sense that one isn't removing this from the chapter because it's like pretty important. Because in the next page, we see Blast here, but only a silhouette in another dimension still. And this is a huge change from the previous version, of course, because not only did we fully see Blast, but we saw a few members of his team. The elfish lady, the lion dude, and one of freaking Boros's race members. And it's fine with me. I'm just glad that we at least got to see it, because we know for sure that it's going to be that way. I don't think it's being like retconned here. They are for sure going to come back, but I guess one just felt it was too soon for that stuff. But anyway, Blast is saying the Earth's magnetic and gravitational fields are going crazy. A spatial distortion is creating a hole in the dimensional seal. He's gonna break through. We gotta hurry up and repair it. So I've talked about and explained what I think this seal is and why it ties into the Dragon Temple coming out of the ocean. I go over all of it in detail in my previous 164 breakdown, which I'll have linked right here. Please check that video out in case you're interested in all of that stuff, because I don't feel like talking about it all over again. But anyway, Saitama winds up hitting Garo with the consecutive normal punches again, and while he's getting pummeled here, Garo is remembering Sage Centipede saying to destroy the abominable fist that turned against God. I thought he was talking about me. And in the previous chapter I said that this was like an ambiguous statement because we didn't really get a concrete answer as to what was going on with that. And I assumed that maybe it wasn't Saitama at first, but then after we heard this, I was like, okay, maybe it was Saitama. Maybe I was wrong and God was aware of him. And it turns out that, yeah, I was wrong. God was actually talking about Saitama, considering what he says later on in this chapter, which makes sense because, you know, Saitama removed his limiter, something that God intentionally placed on humanity or just anyone who is part of his monster system. So just like before, Saitama winds up knocking Garo like a mile away or whatever, except this time when Saitama is walking him down, now he reminds Garo of Tatsu, who we see in Garo's flashback in chapter 82, who is essentially the catalyst for Garo becoming this absolute evil, like his original bully, I guess. So that's like coming full circle with Garo feeling this indignation and this unfairness. We come to the moment of where he's about to punch Saitama for the last time, and originally he said, "Is this how I wanted to die all along?" But now in the new version he says, "There's no way I'll let myself lose to him," which I think is an improvement for sure. And in the original version, Saitama catches his fist, but this time around he just clocks him and finally knocks him out of that monster shell that he was in. And at this point it seems like Garo has straight up been defeated, until God himself starts talking to Garo and he says, "I can hear you." And then this crazy cloud formation starts to form over the sea in front of everyone, and God's feet start coming through it and he's like walking on water. An analogy to Jesus, of course, just, you know, the whole deity contrast thing here. This is truly an incredible sequence. Like, I can't get over how freaking cool this is. And of course this goes back to what Blast was saying earlier in the chapter. The spatial distortion is creating a hole in the dimensional seal. He's gonna break through. So this isn't like him literally breaking through, but this is kind of just like a taste of it, because as we could see, everyone else watching this can't see God's feet, but they can see the big cloud spatial distortion lightning storm thing that he can create. But he's further speaking to Garo here, and he says, "Your deepest wish is now on the verge of falling apart into futility at the hands of a single hero." And then Garo, being Garo, is like, "Huh? Shut your mouth. You want to get killed?" And God's like, "There is only one fist that can counter the fist that is turned against God. What do you think that is?" And then Garo's like, "What are you trying to say? Show your face." And then it's none other than bang. But of course, it's not actually Bang, it's God impersonating Bang. We've seen that this is one of God's methods of tricking people into accepting his influence. We saw when he originally appeared before Homeless Emperor, he was like an ethereal, windy form. And most recently, when he tried to trick Tatsumaki into accepting his influence, he appeared before her as Blast. So naturally, he would choose who Garo trusts the most in Bang. But going further, he's like, there is no master who would just sit back and watch as their student gets beaten. And then he reaches his hand out and Garo accepts it. And this is like the deal being made here. Then Garo comes back down in front of Saitama, and then Saitama's like, Garo, what's with the quick costume change again? And then we see what is quite literally Awaken Garo, because it says Awaken Garo, Cosmic Fear Mode. And yeah, I'm liking this design for sure. It's very similar to what we saw of Garo's first pre-awakened stages, but now he's kind of covered in this spatial form that is showing the galaxy or something. It's possible that these could be all of the locations that God has influence over. Like, these could be some of the galaxies where we see Blast's team coming from, possibly. Or maybe I'm just reading too deep into it and this is just a cool galactic aesthetic. Also Left Eye. But then Garo says something that can counter the fist that is turned against God. I guess that'd be the fist of God. Then he does like the perfect water stream stance, and that's the end of the chapter. So yeah, I guess this is it. Everyone who's been complaining about not getting a big epic Boros-esque fight at the end here, I guess we're gonna get it here. But this is super exciting, and I'm thinking that we are gonna get some of the big crazy feats as well, like the serious feats that we haven't seen yet. Won't go into that stuff, of course, but if you know, you know. So guys, this is it. This is a 10 out of 10 chapter. This is actually the 4th manga chapter that I've given a 10 out of 10 as long as I've been reviewing manga on this channel. This is pretty much as good as it gets right now in the current landscape of battle manga. Like, truly cutting edge, no holding back, just pure cinema, but illustrated. But let's address the elephant in the room, the title of this video, which I'm sure has some of you like this.
No! This is not how this was supposed to go.
And hey, that's understandable because, like, you know, Saitama being defeated, that's nonsense. And yeah, I know, guys, it's me. But we can at least ask that question, and to make a video title that evokes enough emotion in you to want to click on it so you can come here and tell me how angry you are with me. Now, obviously, Saitama hasn't been defeated, well, at least in my opinion, but One and Murata kind of want you to think about it because this chapter kind of leaves it up in the air, right? So it opens up with a little exposition about the water stream, telling us that it takes the knowledge of the flow of energy behind raging currents and tidal surges and creates these within one's body. Putting this into your fists is the secret. Now that in combination with Garo's ability, which is to instantly absorb and copy any techniques, is also an extension of that flow. This is also another reason why Garo is so incredibly OP. Bang, lucky enough, came across this genetic anomaly in Garo, who also had the unfortunate motivation of being bullied to want to grow on top of his extraordinarily inherent gifts, and gave him this broken methodology to synergize with his gifts. And it makes, you know, this savage beast that we've come to love. But what if you took that specimen, the genetic anomaly that Garo is, and took it to the highest level of existence? Forget about raging currents and surging titles, that's child's play, because the power that he received from God in the previous chapter has allowed him to gain the knowledge of the flow of all energy and the behavior of all the forces in the universe. And if this were to be said in like any other battle manga, one that isn't like too extrapolated on its power scale, it would be more so metaphorical, right? But in this sense, and in this chapter's context, it's quite literal. So now with this, Garo has the all-life eradication fist. Forget about the Godslayer fist, that was nothing. This is where it's at now. Hey, also guys, real quick, if you like my One Punch Man content, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're not interested, that's totally fine. But if you needed a reminder because like you didn't think about it, here you go. Thank you. Because after discovering this, Garo just straight up does nuclear fission via a strike to Saitama. And I'm sure you've heard the term nuclear fission before. And if you haven't, let me just tell you that nuclear fission is the method used to develop nuclear bombs, because that's quite literally What is happening here? Garo has become so powerful, and with the knowledge of the flow of all energy and the behavior of all forces in the universe, he can now manipulate it at will and create nuclear bombs with his strike. So all of these strikes that Garo has been delivering to Saitama is the equivalent of a freaking nuke. This is just excellence. This is what it's all about with battle manga. And this is just what I've always wanted. Like, no holding back, but at the same time, it remaining cogent, which most battle mangas can't achieve. But this is it. This is what it's all about. I just can't get over how incredible this sequence is. It's just how things should be at the apex of the series, the culmination of a very long arc that has spanned years, and two of the best in the game, One and Murata, at the peak of their game, just executing peak excellence. But anyway, Psychos is back. We knew that she was gonna come back eventually because she didn't die. We saw that before Tatsumaki hit Orochi with the coup de grace, she separated from him, and that, you know, heavily implied that she was gonna come back sooner or later, especially because I'm pretty sure that she has one last fight left, and it's probably gonna happen soon. Pretty sure you can kind of figure out who her opponent is gonna be. But she says, are they the same as Homeless Emperor's energy spheres? Divine power. They're so massive. So this is of course in reference to God. We know that what Garo is doing now is because of God. We saw in the previous chapter he allegedly accepted his influence, and we'll get into that because it's explained later on. But yes, this power is the same as Homeless Emperors because they're both coming from the same source. But I guess this also means that God is just giving people the ability to split atoms and create nuclear fission and stuff. I mean, Homeless Emperor obviously wasn't on the same level as Garo, not even close. So I guess it was like the equivalent of God giving Homeless Emperor like a new school automatic, and he gave Garo like a super fast manual muscle car. But Saitama and Garo have like a small verbal exchange afterwards, and it leads to Garo saying that in martial arts there are secret techniques called shake that borrow the power of nature by imitating the movements of living things. I call them modes, which sounds cooler. For example, how's this one? Mode Saitama. This is signifying that he has now adapted Saitama's own moveset into his own because he straight up does the consecutive normal punches in another spectacular double spread here. Like, oh my god, this is just beautiful. And then Saitama answers it with his own consecutive normal punches, and we see the fists coming together, but one doesn't seem to overpower the other, and of course they're creating like this massive wake of explosions because of it. And it ends with them both hitting each other in the face, but this is the biggest reaction from a strike that we've seen Saitama take since like Meteoric Burst Boros, I think. And by the way, let's just end that right now. I know we've been talking about it for a while, you know, is Garo going to become stronger than Meteoric Burst Boros, or whatever? It's happened. Cosmic Fear Garo is stronger than Meteoric Burst Boros, easily. He's the strongest antagonist that we've seen in the series by far. Like, this is it. He is, in my opinion, the undisputed disaster level god of the series, if there ever was one. I mean, we're not getting a disaster level box on him, and we probably won't, but you're getting my seal of approval here. Cosmic Fear Garo is disaster level god. Maybe the first legitimate one in the series so far. But after this exchange, Garo says, is this the first time someone has matched you in an exchange of blows? You seem to be at a loss for words. And then Saitama says, oh man, and I went and made a big deal about telling that kid I wouldn't hurt you. I love this because, of course, Saitama's not really too fazed by this. Still more so concerned with his messed up outfit here, which seems to be made of a similar material to Goku's clothes because, you know, taking multiple nuclear explosions to the face hasn't completely vaporized them. But Garo's like, you're still concerned about that brat? Referring to Tario, of course. Then he starts charging up in a similar fashion to like Blast. And then he says, that reminds me, I said I would show that brat how powerless heroes are, didn't I? Then he does a gamma ray burst, firing these two massive beams out of him. Then Saitama jumps up and he says, I don't know what that is, but it looks like it'd be bad news if it even grazes the ground. And then Carl's like, fool, you can't dodge this by jumping. And the gamma ray burst hits Saitama. And it looks like he's being hit like by some DBZ blast. And then it gives us a little explanation on what a gamma ray burst is, which is an explosion that occurs at the end of the life of a massive star and is the largest and most powerful explosive phenomenon that has ever been confirmed in the universe. This isn't like some One Punch Man lore or anything. This is like real life stuff. Like this is happening in existence as we speak. But Garo has become so powerful with the abilities given to him by God that he can just do this. Like I was already gushing over the nuclear fission fists, but this is like the next level. Actually, the highest level. But anyway, Garo comes down and confronts everyone on the ground there. This is after hitting Saitama with that gamma ray burst. And let me also mention, that's the last time we see Saitama in this chapter. Which brings me back to the title, was Saitama defeated by this? And in my opinion, of course, no. I don't think it's even going to hurt Saitama, really. Even if it's implied to be like the apex of power in the universe, Saitama is still above that. Now, whether he comes back naked or not remains to be seen, but I think when Saitama does return, he's going to be like, all right, you want to get serious? Let's get serious. And maybe he does the serious table flip and throws the ground into the sky and then fights Garo up there, you know, to avoid the earth getting damaged anymore. But regardless of what happens, when Saitama comes back, it's game time. We are going to see him give the most earnest performance that he has ever given in the series. Like, even more so than what he did against Boros for sure. Like, much more than that. But everyone kind of realizes that Garo is like disaster level god at this point. I mean, they don't say it, but even Flashy Flash is like running away would be useless. They know that nothing and no one can stop him at this point. Like, it's just simply his pressure on them that is making them feel this way. I mean, you know, they did just witness him create multiple nuclear bombs and a friggin' gamma ray burst, but him just standing in front of them, like, sealed the deal. Like, yeah, this is pretty much God and there's nothing we can do. And then this makes Garo realize, finally, I've achieved my goal. I have become the absolute evil, the symbol of fear. And he looks up saying thank you, assuming he's talking to God here. And then we see Bang come up and he starts talking to Garo and he's like, that form, what happened to you? Even though I felt a response that you had come back to your senses back then. This is a reference to when he initially fought Garo, like when he was still in his feral state. And it did seem like he was kind of bringing him around at that point, but obviously a lot has changed since then. But going further, Bang's like, I heard you say thank you. Did a monster do something to you? And then Garo's like, not really. I always had my senses. And then we go back to the previous chapter and we're seeing what really happened when God impersonating Bang tried to manipulate Garo. Instead of actually taking his hand, Garo slapped it away. And he said, as if the old man would act like such a softie. But apparently slapping his hand was enough, because God then says, even if you didn't fully take my hand, you did just barely touch it. And then Garo realizes what's going on and he's like, oh, I knew it. You're a monster. You thought if you turned into the old man, you could play me like a fiddle? What did you do to me? And God, in his like full Gotti mode, says, I shall make you my avatar. As for what you do with that power, you already know that fully well. And then Garo says, as he said that, he disappeared in the blink of an eye, and I nearly lost consciousness from the intense flow of power throughout my entire body. So that's super interesting, right? We saw that God kind of made Psychos and Homeless Emperor his avatars in a way, but this is the most it's ever been fully apparent. And if you've watched the MCU Moon Knight series, this will probably remind you of the whole relationship between Mark and Khonshu. And I don't think it's a coincidence, because that series dives into Egyptian mythology, and you might have heard me talk about this before on the channel, but One Punch Man and core aspects of it and many characters are based off of Egyptian mythology as well. And I'm pretty sure that One very likely saw the Moon Knight series because, you know, he's interested in that stuff, and maybe this inspired him to take this little leap here. I'm not saying that this wasn't always the plan, because it probably was, but the whole avatar wording here, I think maybe might come from that possibly. But I will say for sure that One always had the Egyptian mythology stuff for years and years and years, like way before the Moon Knight series came around. But Garo says, old man, you once taught me something, to feel the flow of energy and become one with that flow. That is the power of the water stream. And I become one with the flow and succeeded in controlling it. I managed to not turn into that weird thing's puppet. And that's why from here on out, what I do is of my own free will. Is that true? Now, in this moment, I do think it is Garo speaking here. Like, God hasn't possessed his body. But I don't think it's as simple as Garo saying that he's successfully taken God's power and that's it. He's cut off the connection and there's nothing God could do anymore. I don't think it's like that. I think God more or less kind of just gave him the keys to that, you know, old school muscle car and was like, you know, do whatever you want with it, because it's ultimately going to benefit me in the end. God will for sure come back at some point and prove that he still does have control over Garo, but for now, he's kind of just letting him do whatever he wants. But that brings us to the end of the chapter where Garo's like, sorry, Terrio, this is goodbye. Time to conduct evil. And we see him walking towards the crowd of people, and I'm assuming that he's going to just destroy everyone. Is he going to kill some people? Probably not, because like I said, Garo is still cognizant here, and regardless of how far Garo goes with this stuff, I still don't think he's going to kill. If there is a death here, it's going to be because God does it himself or causes it for some reason, but I think we're gonna get the big moment where Garo just annihilates everyone, and this is where Psychos is gonna come into play, either assisting Garo or having like her own fight with somebody. And also, you know, Saitama is gonna be away for a little bit here. I'm not really sure how long. I'm not even sure if he'll be gone for an entire chapter, but like I said, when he comes back, wow, we probably have another 10 out of 10 chapter on our hands, because we're gonna get the big serious fight that we've been looking forward to. Not Saitama using all of his power, that's like end of series stuff, but more than Meteoric Burst Boros for sure. So this is one of the best chapters in the series, and that's pretty incredible because we're coming off of the previous chapter, which was also one of the best in the series, and a chapter that I personally considered a 10 out of 10, which means that this chapter is pretty much a 10 out of 10 as well, meaning that we have consecutive 10 out of 10 chapters here. What a time to be alive. This chapter has everything I've ever wanted from One Punch Man. To go back to the origin of my channel, you'll see that I've always talked about, you know, what's going on with Blast, how strong is he, what's he going to be like in a fight, what does Disaster Level God look like, how strong is that going to be, what is Awakened Garo going to be like in the manga, and what's it going to be like when Saitama finally gets serious. Well, this chapter has it all. I almost feel, at least as an individual, not worthy of this. I feel like Poof and Yuppie from Hunter x Hunter. Yes, I finally read Hunter x Hunter, by the way, and I'll be making a video on my thoughts on the series soon, and I'll also be covering its return on the channel. Coming off of the previous chapter, we saw Garo hit Saitama with the gamma ray burst, and that kind of took him out of the picture for a little bit. So he was able to come back down to the surface and approach everyone that was left there. And we're seeing the result of that, which is like people nearly dying, especially the weaker ones. And this is because Garo has become so powerful from the abilities that God has given him, which is the knowledge of the flow of all energy and behavior of all forces in the universe. Garo now perpetually emits cosmic radiation, and as he approaches, Bang says, inside of Garo I can sense something evil that is not Garo. As I thought, you're being controlled after all. Garo says, I told you, this is of my own free will. So this goes back to the previous chapter of Garo inadvertently accepting God's influence, where God said that Garo is essentially going to become his avatar. But Garo also said that, you know, I'm doing this of my own free will. Yes, he is accepting his power, but it's not like he's being possessed by God, which is true, but nonetheless, he is still being controlled by him in a way. It's not like there's no strings attached here, pun intended, you know, with the puppet stuff. Hey guys, also, if you like my One Punch Man content, please subscribe if you haven't already. It's fine if you don't want to, but if you just needed a reminder, here you go. But then Blast shows up, and once again, the thing that we have discussed in my Patreon Q&A video last week has happened in this chapter, and in that video, I pretty much say the same thing I always have. I don't think it's likely, but it's very possible considering how crazy the manga's continuity has become. And, you know, what do you know? Blast is here, and he says it's just as Silverfang says. You're being controlled by God. And I think this is the first time that Blast has ever said, like, God. Before this, he's only really referred to God as like him or it. He's never like outright said God. And going further, he says, you couldn't tell by the nature of the divine power you were given? Any attack you unleash while on this planet could endanger the very existence of all things. Does that line up with what your actual goals are? So I guess this confirms that Blast is very much aware of what's been going on with Garo. I mean, we barely get any insight into what he's really thinking or what he's actually paying attention to outside of like God. And that's another reason why I didn't fully expect him to show up here, because previously he was like concerned with closing the dimensional seal that was like ruptured, that's implied to be holding back God. So either that means that he's fixed it and now he has some spare time to come and deal with Garo, or he kind of just put the burden on his crew. His crew that is kind of like in this weird retconny purgatory right now. It was like initially revealed that it was like one of Boros' race members, this lion dude and this elf girl, but then that got retconned and they're kind of just silhouettes now. So it's like, we're not supposed to know they exist, but we kind of do know. Then Garo says, if that's true, what are you saying I should do about it? And Blast says, if you've accepted the reality of the situation for the time being, let me lead you to another dimension. So this other dimension, I'm assuming, is that place that he was at with his team. This is where like the dimensional seal was that's implied to be holding God back from entering our reality, I guess. Now when Blast says this, who knows what he actually means? And part of you kind of wants to think like, oh, Blast is going to take him there and then heal him or fix him, right? But another part of you thinks, oh, he's going to take him there and just straight up kill him. But at this point, Blast reveals the whole thing about how he's like emitting cosmic radiation and that humans cannot tolerate it. They have no resistance to it like I do. They will all just die from you being here. Oh yeah, Blast is resistant to this cosmic radiation, no surprise there. But then Blast says, I hope he'll listen to reason and come along with me, but if not, it'll be a battle for supremacy between two beings who manipulate the reality of the cosmos to decide who is right and who is wrong. So I love this statement for many reasons. First of all, it's giving us insight into what Blast's abilities are, and it also gives us insight into like Blast's moral compass. This could mean that Blast is fully aware that only the strongest get to decide what is right and what is wrong, which is like one of the lingering themes of One Punch Man for sure. But him saying two beings who manipulate the reality of the cosmos goes back to what I've been speculating about Blast for the longest time now, and it's that his power is related to God in some way. So I guess this means that Blast also has gained knowledge of the flow of all energy and the behavior of all forces in the universe. Now, I doubt he has it on the level of Garo here, but I also highly doubt that he has Garo's genius skill adaptation ability. But how does Blast have this ability? Well, we don't know, of course, we literally just found this out, but it goes back to me thinking that Blast might have made a deal with God at first, or had some kind of interaction with the cube, and was able to break away from God's control, but retain the abilities that he gained from him. And I also think that Blast is like an Esper somewhat, and that's how he's even able to do this stuff in the first place. And that goes all the way back to Fubuki saying that Blast is an Esper in the data book, aka the One Punch Man Encyclopedia. But anyway, I digress. So Garo is kind of like cool with this. He's fine with emitting this cosmic radiation and everyone dying as a result of it. And he says, I am that miserable future, disaster level God. I talked about this in the video I made last week, that we were probably going to get this moment. And no, this isn't like the official narration box designating Garo as disaster level God. Now, I personally don't need it. I mean, it would be really cool. But I just think at this point, Garo is objectively disaster level God regardless. But then we get an inner monologue from Garo, and he's like, others will be miserable just by being around it. Finish the old man off right here. I'll never see Tario again either. That's how it needs to be, for his sake as well. So yeah, Garo is still there. I mean, his mind is certainly not in the same place that it was a few chapters ago. He's definitely the most unhinged and towards the left-hand path that he's ever been. The core of him is still very much conscious. And speaking of Tario, we see him, and he's still there in the vicinity, and he's like face down, you know, nose bleeding from getting affected by the cosmic radiation. Also, Monaco's here, who's also being affected by the radiation, but she's the one who witnesses Tario, and I guess Monaco's going to save Tario here. I mean, that seems like the most likely thing, but I'm still very suspicious of Monaco. She bears the eye of Horus. But anyway, Genos, who's been like a torso for the last 15 chapters, like burst in there trying to stop Garo still. But of course, this has no effect on him, and Garo's like, Demon Cyborg, huh? How heroic. So that Baldy was at a high enough level to have an S-class hero like you as an apprentice. And I'm glad that this is brought up here, because this is actually, or at least I think this is how Garo knew Saitama's name in the previous chapter. Because I don't think Saitama ever like revealed his name to Garo before that, right? And the only other time that Garo had heard Saitama's name was when he was originally fighting against Genos, like way back in, I think, chapter 83, where he says, like, yeah, my master Saitama, he's like, you know, beyond S-class. And that like planted the seed in Garo's mind, like, oh, there's like a guy out there who's beyond S-Class. And once he finally saw a guy that was like beyond anything else he had encountered before, he kind of put two and two together and was like, oh, this is Saitama for sure. Now we're getting into the real craziness of this chapter, because Blast finally just decides to attack Garo and fires off a dimension cannon at him. But as Garo's dodging this, Blast opens up a portal and winds up behind Garo and hits him with a gravity knuckle. Then he sends Garo into another portal, and that portal sends him to another portal that sends him into Blast's fist. And Blast is just lighting Garo up with gravity knuckles, sending him in and out of portals. This is just an incredible sequence. It's like battle manga Doctor Strange. But Blast tries to like fully close this portal, I'm assuming putting Garo in the other dimension possibly. But Garo breaks out of it and he's like, I see how it is. And in his left fist, he has the nuclear fission, but in his right fist, he has the gravity knuckle. Going back to Garo's insane genius skill adaptation ability, he's already figured out how to do the gravity knuckle. Now, if this was like pre-Cosmic Fear Garo, of course he wouldn't have been able to do this. Now that he has the knowledge of the flow of all energy, he can do this. And at the end of this chapter, Viv showed Blackbeard with the Garo no Mi and the Yami Yami no Mi. And it's a very fitting analogy, because aside from like Saitama, these are essentially like the two greatest powers in One Punch Man at this moment. But he winds up throwing a barrage of nuclear fission and gravity knuckle at Blast. But Blast is also able to counter against it and creates his own little individual portals, sending them in there. And those portals redirect to the sky where we see all those massive explosions happening. And then another portal opens up and they all get sucked into there. This is just... It totally makes sense that Blast is capable of doing this, because we saw what happened when Flashy Flash went like full power, full speed against Blast. It was nothing. Like, he wound up defeating Flashy Flash via fear. So now we're seeing that somebody at that level is capable of doing this. This winds up breaking them apart, and Blast says the gates are bursting from the overload of energy. If this goes on much longer, this will become a dead planet. To be honest, I'm surprised the planet is not dead yet. And Garo says, I see now, you're not S-Class rank 1 for nothing it seems, but for me, now you're not even worth my attention. Then he grabs Genos and he says that Baldy still wasn't giving it his all. Right now, if I copy and refine his full power, I can win, and I can make him bring out his full strength. So I don't think this necessarily means that he's saying that like Blast is a weakling or anything, which it's quite the opposite here. He's giving Blast some serious props. But he does realize that Blast is not as strong as Saitama, which we pretty much knew at this point. And he's already tasted Blast's power and he's obtained his gravity knuckle, but he's like, I need to go higher than that, which is Saitama at his full power, which he's acknowledging here he still hasn't shown yet. And how's he gonna do that? Well, kill his disciple, of course. And he like stabs Genos through his chest and pulls out his core. Then Saitama shows up. Like I said in the beginning, last time we saw him was getting blown away by the gamma ray burst. And who knows where he's been since then, but he's back now. And he's not happy. And Blast is like, you're the guy from before? Don't come close. So he's talking about obviously the moment when Blast, was initially revealed fully in the series. And Saitama, Flash, and Minako found that cube under the Monster Association. And he's still somehow not aware that Saitama is the one above all. Like, if he was aware enough of what's going on with Garo, how is he not aware of who Garo is fighting? But Garo throws Genos' core at Saitama and he catches it. And then he has this flashback of him and Genos. And Genos says, it's amazing how you always manage to be there on time. I guess that's a hero for you. And Saitama says, nah, I usually arrive too late. And yeah, it turns out that is the case. And Saitama starts to question himself and he says, do I really have a hero's intuition? Sure doesn't seem like it. Then we see the true Saitama here. And he throws a serious punch at Garo. But this isn't like a normal serious punch. This is like the death punch. This is like the same serious demon Saitama that we saw against Genos in their training match. But this is exactly what Garo wanted, and he goes back into his mode Saitama and matches the serious punch. And then Blast is like, this energy, this is bad, the earth will be shattered. And that's where the chapter ends. So yeah, Blast is absolutely correct here. If two serious punches collide, in theory the earth would be destroyed by this. Or at least it would cause an extinction level event. So it's possible that Blast might send both of them to the other dimension, like where his team is. And if they go there, then they can fight all out and there would seemingly be no repercussions, at least to the Earth. I mean, who knows how the rules work in the other dimension? But at least, Earth won't be destroyed as a result. And I speculated that this would kind of be like the final battle of One Punch Man, to be honest, like Saitama and God fighting in some other dimension or something, but man, I was thinking too low. And I guess by the time we get to that point, the bar will be raised so much that it'll be something that we haven't even thought of at this point. But yeah, this chapter is pretty much as good as it gets in battle manga, in my opinion. And I just feel so lucky to be able to experience this at this point in time. But let me know what you guys think about this chapter in the comments. Who do you think is going to come out on top? I mean, obviously Saitama, but how many serious punches do you think Garo is going to be able to take or compete with? So another incredible chapter here. This is, I guess, like one of the best fights in battle manga ever, right? Also, shout out to the team that gets these translations out. It's pretty much a thankless job at this point, but these guys really do put in some serious work, and we're completely spoiled at this point. So thank you to the team that makes this possible. Coming into this one, as we expected, Blast opens up one of his portals, which is actually now known as a hyperspace gate, and I think that's pretty cool, so I'm just gonna call them that. And he's trying to divert them somewhere else so that, you know, Earth doesn't explode. And he winds up getting them just above Earth, and he says the gate can't handle this much energy. I can't give it enough distance. And then suddenly we see his silhouetted team appear behind him. This is like the retcon brigade at this point. And I say that because they were kind of introduced originally in chapter 164, but then that got changed and now they're just silhouettes. So we know at least two of these people here. We know that this guy is like a Boros race member, and then this guy is like some kind of lion being. However, this woman is kinda new. And I say kinda because we saw her before in chapter 156 when Blast's team was like first shown. There's like 9 members including Blast in this team, or at least 9, there could be more. But we saw her in the forefront. But she wasn't there in the original chapter 164. It was like an elf woman. Anyway, they're able to help Blast like close this gate. And this may confirm my suspicion about his team, and it's that they all kind of share the same powers, which Blast refers to as beings who manipulate the reality of the cosmos. Now, I'm not saying they're all one for one identical in their abilities, but I think they more or less all can kind of do the same thing if they wanted to. And that's most likely the linking factor among them, aside from God. And it's possible that their powers come from God, like they reverse engineered what they're referring to here as divine power. But anyway, the gate almost winds up closing, but then suddenly it just shoots off in a beam into the distance. And before we go to where that beam went, we got to take a look at this moon panel here, because we're seeing the dark side of it, which we haven't seen yet. We've primarily just seen the front where the eye crater is. But now that we see the back, there's another crater, and it looks like a spine or something, right? It looks like the back of some kind of being. And if it is that, I'm not saying for sure it is, but if it is, then it's very likely to be God's body, or like his corpse or something. I know it's getting confusing now because God is seemingly sealed in some kind of dimension, right? I mean, or at least that's what Blast said, or heavily implied. So why is he also in the moon? Well, I don't know. This could be where God crash landed when he originally came to Earth. I don't think God originated on Earth. He does come from the cosmos somewhere. I mean, I think that's why he's infected so many different planets. And that's where we get Blast's group. Like, they all come from a lineage that originally sealed God, and maybe that's why he had to leave this place. And I also think it goes back to a story that one made aside from One Punch Man. It was like a one-shot manga called Monster of Earth. And in the beginning of that, it says, in the past, before Earth received the attention of monsters, an alien who lost his home world to war drifted to Earth. He adapted to the environment and the culture of Earth and married an Earthling. Not long after, they gave birth to a child. Naturally, this is not a normal child. He inherited the alien's abilities. One is not obviously just directly copying that story, but I think it kind of lines up with what's going on here. But I just would have assumed that if God was sealed in another dimension, then all of him would be. But I guess there's like a separation here between like his corporeal form and his consciousness, maybe? I don't really know. Let me know in the comments. Hey, also guys, if you like my One Punch Man content, please subscribe if you haven't already. It's fine if you don't want to, but if you just needed a reminder, Here you go. But anyway, Saitama and Garo wind up getting shot to Io, one of the moons of Jupiter. I know, quite an incredible distance. And Jupiter is kind of significant here, and I'm not entirely sure why. Now, we have heard Jupiter be mentioned in the series before, back in chapter 130 of the Viz, at least. When Psychos is fusing with Orochi, she's like visited by God, and she compares it to like the surface of Jupiter. Now, what I actually think she's looking at is just like the face of God, but like he's so big and close to her that it just appears that way to her. Also, the title of chapter 143 is Jupiter, the Bringer of Jollity, which is like an orchestral song by Gustav Holst. And I don't want to bore you guys with the mythology stuff, but Jupiter is like one of the ancient Roman religion gods who is considered like the king of gods, and one of his equivalents is Indra from Hinduism, and they could ultimately just be a part of what makes up God, although there are many things that make him up. Ashura from Buddhism is another big aspect of God, but I think the biggest influence on him is Osiris. By the way, going back to the crater in the moon, on our actual moon in real life, there's a crater there called Osiris. But regardless, one is like a big mythology nerd, just like Oda and Kishimoto. So there's a lot that goes into him crafting these characters. And this is like his way of kind of showing us without telling us. But anyway, Saitama and Garo are just beyond powerful to be able to just exist here, because it's clearly not affecting them at all. Garo, more understandable since he can manipulate the cosmos, and he is like cosmic radiation himself, so, you know, it's understandable if it wouldn't affect him. But Saitama, you know, he's just a human, ostensibly, but obviously much more than that. What I'm trying to say is that, like, I don't think Bang or like another S-class hero besides Blast would be able to just be chilling here like this, because Io is not inhabitable by a human in the slightest. But Saitama says, oh well, at least I can let loose at full power against a guy who could stay up. Now that's a problematic statement. Does that mean that he literally is using his full power? I guess, but I don't think this means that like this is his absolute peak and that he can't show any more power than this because this is it, and that there's a chance he can lose here. I don't think that's the case at all. When he says full power, I think he just means not having to worry about the earth and he could just not hold back. That makes sense. But then Saitama mentions holding Genos' core, and he says I better keep a tight grip on it, like he doesn't want to lose it, you know, by falling out of his costume or whatever. And this is great for many reasons. So first of all, this means that Genos is going to survive, because obviously one is making sure that we know that the core is being kept intact here. And also, if we go back to chapter 93, which I think is chapter 91 in the Viz, Dr. Kuseno says if you do use your full power, 10 seconds is the limit. Your body cannot withstand anymore. You may be a cyborg, but you'll die if your energy core explodes. So I guess that means that, you know, he could live as long as he has the core. Like, we saw half of his head was missing, but I guess that doesn't matter. And also, this is just an incredible way for one to raise the stakes on Saitama here and not show everything he's fully capable of, and to also not give him overexposure, because, you know, there's plenty of time left in the series for Saitama to go even more deeper than this into his power and effort. And also, you know, it's just very one and just very Saitama to fight the grand epic battle with one hand while he's like making sure that something precious to him doesn't break. It's just really great writing here. So at this point, it seems like Garo's actually trying to like pause the battle, and because he's like, hey, I don't know how this happened, but we actually kind of wound up on one of Jupiter's moons, so we got to think a way to get back. And Saitama's like, nah, you're not getting out of this. We can talk about that after I beat the crap out of you. And then Garo's like, okay, we can do that later. And he opens up a gate underneath Saitama, which means that, yeah, Garo already copied this move from Blast, just like he copied the gravity knuckle. And Saitama just kicks it out of the way. He's like, no, we're not going anywhere. And this is incredible because, like I said before, it's showing us what Saitama is truly capable of. He is not bound by anything, essentially. And we kind of got a taste of this in the redraw of chapter 100 when Phoenix Man sent Child Emperor to like that spiritual place, or whatever you want to call it, which is implied to kind of like happen in the mind or whatever. Saitama just broke in there like tangibly. And he's kind of doing like similar feats here as to where, like I said, he's not bound by anything. He is genuinely absolute power, not just in the physical sense. Then he just punches Garo off of the moon, and Garo winds up opening a portal to save himself from being, you know, thrown into the ether. Then he calls out Garo for like using tricks and not his ultimate martial arts, and Garo, I don't know, a little bit gets offended by this, and he's like, I've absorbed countless styles and I'm using them all in synergy. And he winds up doing this incredible sequence to Saitama where he opens up multiple hyperspace gates and hits Saitama with a whole bunch of moves that he's learned throughout the series, a whole bunch that we've seen him learn. And he winds up finishing the combo with a nuclear fission and a gravity knuckle, something we saw him do in the previous chapter. And afterwards, of course, this has done nothing to Saitama, but now he goes into his next serious move, which is the serious table flip. This is something that we webcomic readers have been waiting for a long time, and it's finally delivering in the manga, and it's just as incredible as we assumed it was going to be. We thought maybe he would have did something on Earth, but no, this makes more sense because this is definitely the grand scale that this move needed to be on. Because like I said, this is coming from the webcomic, and in that continuity, he kind of just throws up a section of Z City. It was incredible then, but you know, the manga is a different kind of animal. But he winds up throwing the entire surface of Io here. Then he darts around all the pieces of the surface and winds up doing another serious move in his omnidirectional serious punch. This is something that I was not expecting at all, which is great because I don't want to know what he's going to do next. I'm more so like coming into this blindly. And this kind of reminds me of Sonic's 10 Shadows Burial, and I wonder if Saitama was influenced by that. But he's moving so fast here that it seems like he's tangibly replicating himself, and they're all like actual serious punches coming at Garo. But Garo opens up a gate and tries to, you know, dip out of there, but Saitama being so fast, he's already in the gate, and he smacks Garo away. Garo tries to like regain himself, and he's like, if I could just get above the barrage of rocks, he shouldn't be able to move around as he pleases. Then he opens up a gate and he winds up landing head first in the surface because he's so rattled after what Saitama did here, and he says, I'm completely lost my sense of direction, like a caged insect being played with by a child. This is also a reference to the webcomic continuity of this fight, and I doubt this will be the last one. Actually, I'm pretty sure in the next chapter we're probably going to get another recreation of an iconic sequence that really exemplifies who Saitama is. I mean, we're seeing the true Saitama in this chapter, but more so I'm talking about like Saitama when he acknowledges more or less that he is God. But once Garo tries to rebound, he gets hit with a serious punch again. This is remarkable because he's been hit with multiple serious punches, and he's kind of just been taking them like they were a normal punch. Now, I know I said in the previous video that Garo has surpassed Boros, but he's way beyond Boros at this point. I really didn't expect people to just casually be taking serious punches like this until much later on in the series. And Garo's like so strong, he's limitlessly strong, and that is pretty much the case. He did remove his limiter. It's getting to the point of where it's like being implied that Saitama's power is like unquantifiable. And then he says, if that's the case, then I'll just have to copy him limitlessly until I win. And then he gets a little counter punch on Saitama while, you know, also taking another strike in the process. And it looks like blood is coming out of Saitama's mouth. I don't want to jump the gun here. Now, either that's blood or it's like debris or something coming from his fist. But if this is blood, then this is like the first time blood has been shed from Saitama, or even damage, since he's removed his limiter. And, you know, getting scratched by Toriko, of course. But when he says, I just have to copy him limitlessly until I win, that doesn't mean like he's literally copying his power. That's not what Garo's ability is. And also, even if he could, I doubt he could copy Saitama's power anyway. It just literally means, as he says, he'll have to copy him limitlessly. He'll just have to keep adapting and using what he's using against him until he wins, which, you know, it's an exercise in futility at this point. But yeah, that's where the chapter ends, and I'm really looking forward to seeing if Saitama actually did produce blood, because if he did, then wow, that's really taking the series into a different direction. Like I said before, with taking casual series punches, I did not expect Saitama to bleed until near the end, but we'll see what happens. So this was truly an incredible chapter. This is pretty much as good as it gets in the current landscape of battle manga, in my opinion. And I gotta say it, this is yet again another 10 out of 10 chapter. This is the third 10 out of 10 chapter I've given this year, which is very unusual, and they've all been One Punch Man. So bravo to One and Murata, and also bravo to the team that provides us with these translations. Like I said before, it's pretty much a thankless job, and they don't really have to bust their butts to get this out for us, but they do it anyway. So thanks, guys. But anyway, coming off at the end of the previous chapter, we saw Garo and Saitama exchange punches, and we were wondering, you know, is there a chance that this was like blood coming out of Saitama's mouth? But we weren't convinced, of course. We assumed that it was probably debris, and yeah, it turns out that was, yeah, debris. But after we go through a sequence of Saitama just easily handling Garo through some of the hyperspace portals, he eventually just comes down and chops him in the back of the neck with a huge impact. Hey, also guys, if you like my One Punch Man content, please subscribe if you haven't already. I'm 5,000 away from 200,000 subs, so if you can help me with that, that would be awesome. Thanks, guys. He's like, what's wrong? You said you were gonna copy me when I'm serious and surpass me, didn't you? Go ahead and try. Isn't that the whole point of this? And Garo's like, I don't get it. I'm countering him with just as much power, but the next attack hits even harder. I can't keep up. And then we see this graph of Saitama and Garo. And as Garo is becoming parallel with Saitama on the graph, Saitama eventually surpasses him going upwards, until he just completely leaves him behind. This is signifying the difference in the growth of their power. As we know, Garo can become stronger progressively as the fight goes on. It was stated in his fight against Darkshine that essentially when he's pushed against an opponent who is strong enough, he can basically rise to the occasion and become as strong as he needs to in order to defeat that opponent. I mean, I'm paraphrasing and that's simplifying it, but that's more or less what Garo is also known for, aside from just having the ability to copy techniques. But Saitama, on the other hand, goes to the next level in this regard. It's just that he needs an excuse to use more of his power, because he ostensibly has an infinite amount of it. As we know, Saitama removed his limiter. That's how he became as strong as he is. Therefore, he has no limit, so he can, in theory, always become stronger. And so far, we've seen him only pushed so much until facing off against Cosmic Fear Garo. And since Cosmic Fear Garo could copy Saitama's techniques and imitate his current level of power, naturally Saitama's own power adapts and then surpasses that. So that's pretty much the explanation as to how Garo was able to hang with Saitama up until this point, you know, going tit for tat with serious strikes and whatnot. But since Garo has not removed his own limiter, he will never ever be able to become as strong as Saitama. And this leads him to saying, at this rate, one of these punches is eventually going to kill me. Even now, Saitama was continuing to grow. His rate of growth, which had gone unnoticed by anyone since there was nobody remotely on par with his strength, suddenly began to soar exponentially due to an upsurge of emotion like none he had ever experienced. And now that Saitama is using this insane level of power, the most we've ever had to see him use in the series, he does one of the craziest feats you'll probably ever see in battle manga. As to where he does a serious sneeze that like explodes the surface of Jupiter. Yes, he is exploding the surface of Jupiter from a sneeze. And this is how big Jupiter is compared to Earth, by the way. So as I've been saying these last couple of weeks, there's many levels to Saitama's power that we, the audience, still haven't seen yet. And as the series goes on, his feats will get progressively more and more insane, to the point of where he truly will exemplify that he is, as I call him, the one above all. And to be honest, I didn't expect to see this, especially at this point in the series, and not from a sneeze of all things. And rightfully so, Garo is like shocked, and he says a being like that shouldn't be allowed to roam free on Earth. This is an important line here because this is going to be a theme going forward into the series. It's something that is going to be explored in the future arcs for sure. And as Garo's darting away, he's able to spot Earth from a distance. Don't ask me how, I know it's light years away, but he's able to do it because he's Cosmic Fear Garo. He has an unfathomable understanding of all energy and the universe, so just go with it. And he says if it's in my range of vision, I can teleport there. So he hits Saitama with a nuclear fission fist and then hops in a hyperspace gate and goes to Earth. But Saitama is like instantly right behind him and he's like, wow, that move you got there is pretty nifty. And Garo, of course, is like confused as to how this happened. Saitama said, I had a stomach ache from the cold and was holding it in, but when I got surprised by that flash of light, a fart came out. And we see his fart has propelled him fast enough to catch Garo and go into the hyperspace gate leading to Earth. This is hilarious for multiple reasons. First of all, friggin' fart. And this will definitely give more ammo to the people that say this is a gag series. But it's also funny because a couple years ago, Murata was asked on one of his live streams, I think, that what would have happened if when Boros kicked Saitama to the moon, what if the moon wasn't there and Saitama just, got sent to space? And Murata said he would just serious fart his way back to Earth. So I think this sequence is actually a Murata original rather than just one writing it like he typically does. But Saitama winds up punching Garo back down to Earth, actually in the same spot that they originally came from. And this is pretty much the end here. He's hit him so hard that his face is cracked and Garo is basically asking him to just kill him. And Saitama says, compared to people like you with your quick costume changes, or King, I really hate the fact that I'm not cut out for this at all. But it's because I'm a hero. Not to mention, it was also that kid's final request that I stop you without killing you. So yeah, I think I talked about this like 2 weeks ago. People were asking me like, why didn't Saitama just kill Garo? Because I said that he totally was capable of, and I think that if any time Saitama really wanted to, he could have just ended the fight if he just, increased his power enough to the point of where he wanted to. But then I said, he didn't kill him because he still kind of sees Garo as like a human, and a human who's, trying to do the right thing, but just very conflicted and going in the wrong direction about it. But also he was honoring Tario's wish of stopping Garo without killing him. But after he mentions Tario, Garo looks over to him and he sees that Tario has like straight up died. This is of course because of Garo's cosmic radiation. We had seen that he was like infecting everybody and they had succumbed to radiation sickness for the most part, but we weren't sure if they had died. Now that Tario is dead, this means that like pretty much everyone else has died too. And of course, this just breaks Garo. Like he's tripping over himself and everything. Tario was like the one thing in life that Garo cared about other than just becoming the absolute evil. And Saitama says, you've been acting really weird ever since you fell down from the sky. Are you sure some weirdo didn't do something to you? Garo says, if they did, it's because my spirit was too weak. Of course, talking about accepting God's influence inadvertently, but also he did kind of want it. I mean, he thanked him after all, right? So after this, it ultimately comes to the point of where Garo has accepted his fate and he realizes what he must do to set things right. And he asks Saitama for a favor. And basically that favor is for him to copy his ultimate technique of his ultimate ability. Something that he hasn't even done yet. And we're going to find out that this is pretty much the ability to travel back in time. Remember, after receiving God's power, Garo received the understanding of all energies in the universe. And with that, he figured that theoretically he could go back in time. So he starts showing Saitama how to do this, and he's like, if anyone can master the power of God without taking God's hands, it's you. And then speak of the devil, God's like, silence, I am taking them back. This is pretty much what God does when he doesn't like what the person he gave powers to is doing. We saw him do that with Homeless Emperor. He said the same exact thing, except instead of appearing in front of Garo like he did with Homeless Emperor, he's just instantly turning him into salt here. And salt is pretty interesting because there's a lot of religious symbology here. This could mean a whole bunch of stuff. It could be in reference to mummification in Egyptian mythology. It could also be in reference to like Christianity as well. Like in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, there's a character that gets turned into a pillar of salt by God. Regardless, it just has some kind of religious significance to it. And it just ultimately correlates to God, who the character himself has a lot of religious influence from many different mythologies and religions and whatnot. But as Garo is turning to salt, basically dying, he's like, concentrate. And the narrator takes over and he says, the two of them were imagining their own inner universes, particles and antiparticles, generated in pairs by Garo's intense cosmic rays. Each subatomic particle began moving in opposite directions. They began to imitate each other's movements. When all of the subatomic particles inside of Saitama did this, and Garo says, now Saitama, get going and defeat it. You of all people can do it. What you've got to do is defeat that ominous future. And then Garo dies. And And this is, I guess, us getting our cake and being able to eat it too, because this is a great fitting ending for the character of Garo. He's ultimately sacrificing himself for the greater good, even though he initially didn't want to, but he saw the error in his ways and made the ultimate sacrifice, which is just basically a perfect character arc for this character. But considering that Saitama is going to go back in time, essentially to an entirely different reality, we as the readers don't have to lose Garo as a character, because he will exist in that new reality. But at the same time, we get to have a satisfying send-off for him. So like I said, this is us getting our cake and eating it. But anyway, we see Saitama travel back in time and he's reliving his fight with Garo. And then he eventually goes back to the end of chapter 165. After Garo had blasted Saitama away with the gamma ray burst and announces to everybody that he is the ominous future disaster level god. Right before he arrives in that timeline, Saitama throws a punch, and once he comes into their time, the punch lands and just one-shots Garo. And it says that punch, abnormally powered up on the moon of Jupiter, went back in time and landed before it was thrown. So yeah, that means that Saitama wasn't using a level of power in chapter 165 that he's using in this chapter because of the stuff that we talked about earlier. So Saitama using this level of power can just instantly one-shot Cosmic Fear Garo, especially one who hadn't powered himself up trying to copy Saitama in the following chapters. And we get this incredible ending sequence here, very fitting for the ending of such an epic battle and an incredible arc. And we see that everybody's still alive. Nobody has been affected by the cosmic radiation yet because it hasn't really had time to fester and whatnot. And after receiving such a harsh blow, Garo just seems to lose his power that he inherited from God by being his avatar. This is actually in reference to the webcomic as well, but in the webcomic it was extremely ambiguous since Awakened Garo didn't receive God's power at that time. I mean, technically he did since he was a monster, but it was never outright stated that it was like God's power that was given to him. He more so just said like, the Godslayer fist is leaving me. But after Saitama lands the punch, we see that the Saitama that was in that timeline, who just got blasted by the gamma ray burst, suddenly merges together with the naked future Saitama, and they become one now. But it also causes a wardrobe malfunction, and Saitama's crotch is bare. So yeah, this is ultimately resolved by time travel. And I think it works because it wasn't Saitama that wanted to do it. It's not like he needed to do it. It seems like Saitama was just fine with living in that desolate future where pretty much all of his friends died of cosmic radiation. But it was actually Garo that did it and sacrificed himself in the process. So I think it works. But it's also a good way to kind of erase the fact that everybody is aware that Saitama is the one who defeated him, because Saitama was naked when he punched Garo. And I guess they're just going to say like, oh, we couldn't really see who did that. And now that he's fused with his previous self, he's clothed again. So I think that's just going to be the out here to everyone not being fully aware that Saitama is the one above all. And speaking of that, that means that Blast isn't really fully aware of it either, because it's in chapter 166 when Blast shows up and, you know, really gets his hands dirty and is aware that Saitama is the one who can challenge Cosmic Fear Garo. So now all of that's gone, and I guess we're gonna go back to Blast being none the wiser, possibly. But I wouldn't be surprised if Blast does know that some kind of time stuff has gone on because, you know, he's Blast. But regardless, I wouldn't be surprised at all if God totally knows what's going on here, because if Garo can manipulate time and show Saitama how to do it, then I'm positive that God somehow can too, right? But Genos, who is alive now, winds up reuniting with Saitama, and Saitama still has the core in his hand. So now there's two cores, and I guess this means a potential power up for Genos. So after 7 years, nearly 8 years at this point, Garo has finally fully been defeated. But the arc isn't over yet, believe it or not. Murata tweeted that the next chapter is actually going to be the end of the monsterization / Garo arc. But Garo's plight here, just him being the hero hunter, which started, I think, in like chapter 40, like over 7 years ago, is finally over. And I think we got a pretty satisfying conclusion here. It took some elements of the original webcomic version and of course remixed them and improved upon some aspects, as the manga typically does. And I overall just really enjoyed this chapter. But first, let me just give a shout out to the team that was able to give us these translations escalations. They were actually down a few members, I think, but they were still able to pull through and get it out in a reasonable amount of time. So thank you guys. But anyway, opening up in the chapter here, we see Garo just successfully being defeated by the Zero Punch from Saitama. This was a result of Saitama successfully traveling backwards in time and hitting Garo with a punch that was so incredibly overpowered because the Saitama that came from the future was way more powerful than the Saitama that was in the past timeline because Garo had pushed him to become that strong. Hey, also guys, if you like my One Punch Man content, please subscribe if you haven't already. It's fine if you don't want to, but if you just need a reminder, here you go. Thanks. But Saitama essentially knocked the god power out of Garo here. And I'm not necessarily sure how strong Garo is at this point or what's really going on with him. Like, is he kind of monstrified still, or is he just a full-blown human at this point? It really remains to be seen, but I'm going to assume that it's more so the latter at this point. But we see all of like the angered heroes surrounding him. And this is just a really satisfying sequence because these are like the heroes that Garo had like hero hunted throughout the story. Like, we see the tank toppers here. They were actually like one of his first victims, and now they're all like finally getting revenge on him. Even though it's not really doing anything, it's still just, I don't know, for some reason I really like this. But anyway, Saitama shows the future core to Genos, and Genos is able to immediately identify that it's from the future. This is of course because in the original timeline that Saitama came from, Garo ripped it out of Genos, and Saitama basically held on to it the whole time, making sure that it was kept safe. And when he successfully went back in time, he still had it with him. And Genos is like immediately hooking up like one of his cables to the core, and he's able to recount pretty much everything that happened in the future timeline. Basically chapters 166 to chapter 168. And we actually talked about this like I think 2 weeks ago in one of my Q&A videos. But I also think that this core is important for multiple reasons, because on the surface it seems like it's probably going to be the catalyst for some kind of power up with Genos, him having 2 cores now or something like that. But I wouldn't be surprised if this at least recorded data up until it was ripped out of Genos, meaning that it could be aware of what happened at least up until that point, which is something that technically Saitama right now shouldn't be aware of. Now at that time, I thought that the core was going to be recording information, of course, but I didn't expect it to be able to record everything, like even after it was ripped out of Genos, because at that point it was kind of just by itself and it wasn't hooked up to anything. So why was it still like recording everything somehow? I mean, I'm not gonna question it too much. It is what it is, and it's actually better this way, that Genos is aware of everything that happened, not just up until the point of it being pulled out. Now Genos is pretty much aware of everything that happened, and he's actually able to make sense of the time travel for the most part, and we get this massive exposition dump, which is like classic Genos. But basically what he's saying in this dump here is that Saitama traveling from the future does indeed like create multiple timelines, or as he says, parallel worlds. And this is something that we've been talking about for the last couple weeks as well, because this is realistically the only way that this could work. Saitama left one timeline, which is like technically like another universe, to go back to a point in the past, which is technically another universe. It's not like one single timeline the way that it works in Terminator. It's more like Avengers Endgame rules. But wrapping this up, Genos basically says, or at least this is the way that I interpret it, is that this was always going to happen, essentially, or at least Saitama would always find a way to save everyone. Even if everyone were to die, Saitama would still transcend and manipulate the laws of causality, which goes back to the previous chapter. After Saitama punches Garo coming back from the future, it says reversal of causality absolutely unavoidable, which essentially means that this is always going to happen. So going back to Avengers, you can kind of think about it like how Doctor Strange had to go through all those different timelines to see which ones Thanos didn't win. And it wound up being like, I don't know, 14 million something timelines where Thanos always wins, but there's only one where he doesn't. Well, in this case, there are no timelines in which Saitama doesn't win here. Not even one. That's how ridiculous Saitama is, essentially. But this goes in one ear of Saitama and out the other. Like, this is, you know, typical Saitama. He doesn't really care. Even as crazy and fantastical as this is and what he's technically been through, it's still just like, ah, you're kind of talking too much. But the important thing here is that Genos is aware of it, and also the core has this information recorded on it, because I don't think this is going to be the end of this stuff. The information on the core is for sure going to come back later on, in my opinion. It's possible that Drive Knight and the organization is going to get this core and or the information on it. But let me just clarify that I don't think it's guaranteed that they're going to get their hands on this information. And even if they do, I'm not saying like Drive Knight's going to like travel back in time or something, but something will come of this information in the future for sure. But anyway, going further, we see Tario get up. Of course, we saw in the future timeline that he winds up dying from exposure to Garo's cosmic radiation. But now that, you know, Garo has been taken out before he was able to release enough of it, he's alive now. But he also sees like this time ghost of Garo here. You could make of this what you want. It's kind of just like a fragment of Garo transcending space and time or something. This is like, you know, the true Garo, I guess you could say, the future Garo that winds up sacrificing himself for the greater good, teaching Saitama how to go back in time. But this is just like the last bit of sentience that I guess that Garo had, just seeing that he ultimately wound up saving Tario and that everything he did wasn't for naught. And after this, we see that the current Garo has just come to terms with losing here, because it says perhaps it was just because everything that had been set up by his future self, though Garo had no way of knowing that, which he doesn't. But just the way that this is like working here, the two personalities of the Garos kind of like sync up in a way, and he's subconsciously able to realize that like, oh, this was kind of supposed to happen, even though he's not aware of it, but he is aware of it. So then we get to the point of where the heroes are kind of debating on what they should do with Garo. Some, of course, want to execute him, like My Mask, and some don't, like Metalbat. We saw Metalbat teamed up with Garo earlier on in this arc when Garo was like in full babyface mode, and they kind of had a little bromance going on, so it's understandable that he doesn't want to, you know, straight up execute him. And, you know, My Mask is a My Mask, so completely understandable that he would. But then we see Saitama say, who took down Garo, by the way? Was it Blast? And Flashy Flash says, it seemed like a naked man appeared out of nowhere, defeated Garo with one punch, then flew away. That pattern of movement does seem like something out of Blast's playbook. And then Second Guard's like, you're saying Blast actually helped out? And why naked? So this answers our question of who was going to take credit for taking down Garo, and I assumed that it wasn't going to be Saitama, of course. It's way too early on in the story for everyone to acknowledge him to be the one above all. And I knew that him being naked delivering the punch was going to have something to do with that, because, you know, once they fused together, he wound up having clothes again, despite the crotch being removed. But it turns out it's actually Blast that's going to be taking the credit here, which is, you know, cool. Sets up the legend of Blast going further, but also Blast not showing up in this chapter, and I expected him to. But I guess he's going to show up in the next chapter, because I really want to see how he reacts to all of this time travel stuff, and even if he's aware of it. And also, he still needs to, like, deliver exposition to, if not Saitama, then just somebody. Then Zombie Man kind of steps up to Garo while everyone's beating him, and he's like, there's no way a human can gain that much power just through monsterization. Are you sure there wasn't another source of power that was using you as a catalyst? For example, God or something like that? One of the enemy cadre showed similar signs. Of course, he's talking about Homeless Emperor here. When Zombie Man was eventually able to defeat Homeless Emperor, he got enough information out of him to know that God gave him powers pretty much, but as soon as he started saying that, God killed him. And, you know, considering what Garo was able to do, they were kind of similar to the energy manipulation that Homeless Emperor was able to do, so he kind of put two and two together and was like, oh, you're probably getting God's power, which he's right about. But of course, Garo's playing it off, acting like, you know, that was all just me, even though Garo knows for sure that it was God that gave him powers, because he basically tells the audience and Saitama that in the previous chapters. But Garo's just, you know, being Garo here. And he's pretty much just asking them to kill him. Like, he's at his wit's end here. He's just lost everything, essentially. But before My Mask is able to kill him, Tario comes in and he grabs him by the leg. He's like, Uncle is a real hero, saved me a bunch of times. Hurry up and run, Uncle. We see like all of the heroes deliberating here on what they should do with Garo, and then King steps in and he puts his King engine on maximum output. We haven't seen this before. And he just conquer hockeys everyone out of the way. He even shuts up a My Mask here. Like, I just love this sequence. I'm such a sucker for like King moments. And then Bang steps up and he's like, I won't let you throw your life away so easily. If you've caused harm to people, then you must make up for it 10 times over, 100 times over by saving others. And Saitama says that's what absolute evil is best at, right? Of course, this is in reference to before all of the Cosmic Garo stuff, when Saitama was originally going against like the gargoyle-esque Garo. Despite everything that Garo was doing, try to be the absolute evil, to try to like defeat Saitama, he just wound up helping people. But going back to what Bang is saying here, I think this does mean mean that Garo will eventually become a hero to some degree. Like, I don't think he's going to join the Hero Association or whatever and like become like an S-class hero, but he's kind of going to do his own thing. Like, he'll for sure be like a full-blown anti-hero rather than just like an anti-villain. He's probably going to become something like the Punisher or something. But after this, Garo is able to sprint away and he just successfully makes it out of there. And Genos is like, he'll probably be a repeat offender. And Saitama's like, nah, he'll be fine. We should just leave the rest up to the old man. So I think this means that eventually we are going to see Garo and Bang reconcile. Like at some point in the story, maybe in the, the last big arc or big saga, I think that they are going to come together and Bang is going to give Garo his final training or something like that. But anyway, at the end of the chapter, we see Metal Knight come out of nowhere and he has like an entire army of robots with him. And he's like, the ship I designed caught a nuclear blast. I will now begin the disposal of the fallout and an analytical investigation of the attack. All of you suffering from acute radiation poisoning, there will be mandatory testing and decontamination procedures at the lab for everyone. This is amazing. I'm a big fan of Metal Knight, and this is just part of the course for him because he showed up at the end of the Boros arc and kind of just like cleaned up after everyone was done. And it's also funny because he was like super opposed to raiding the Monster Association in the first place. He just wanted to bomb the whole entire thing and not even, send anyone physically there. But the fact that he's showing up is, better late than never because he's also taking care of the nuclear fallout here, which is like kind of a big deal because Garo did launch a bunch of nuclear fission fists, which were like the equivalent of nuclear bombs going off, and he did fire a gamma ray burst. This all still happened in this timeline. Like, Saitama came back after he was hit by the gamma ray burst. So the fact that Metal Knight is cleaning this up, like I said, is important, and also he's, helping everybody who was affected by the radiation poisoning, which is super important as well. I'm hoping this changes some of your minds on everyone who was so keen on Metal Knight being the traitor here, because Drive Knight ain't doing this. Drive Knight pieced out, remember? He left as soon as he got what he wanted. He even left Genos to die after like draining him. So come on guys, Metal Knight's a good guy. And then at the very end of the chapter, we see Saitama all sad and he's like, for now, Genos, let's just have Kuseno fix up your arms and legs. Then we can start looking for what's left of our apartment. Because, over the course of this battle, most of Z City has been destroyed, including Saitama's apartment. And that's going to be an important aspect of the story going further, at least with Saitama. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the video. Let me know what you think about this chapter in the comments. And if you liked it, please give it a like and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day and I'll see you in the next one.